Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Better. It is a weekly interview show sponsored by Newsweek, and I am Dorie Clark. I am here with the amazing author, Liz Wiseman. Liz is a member of Thinkers 50, one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world. Her new book, which is just out, is called Impact Players. She is also the best-selling author of previous books, Rookie Smarts and Multipliers. Liz, it's so fantastic to have you here.
Oh, Dorie, I love talking to you, so I'm excited to do this live.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about some of the themes in your latest book and how to grow your impact as a leader. And we also want to welcome some of the great folks who are tuning in live from around the world. So please feel free, as you're tuning in, type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are dialing in from. We'd love to hear from you, and also, of course, to take your questions for Liz Wiseman. So Liz, before we get into Impact Players, I am actually curious. I would love to actually just start with some of the historical oeuvre, because you've written some books that have really become classics in the genre. And perhaps your most famous is called Multipliers. And in the book, which I think has made a big impact in the corporate world, you talk about how some people are multipliers. They increase and enhance the impact of those around them. Others are diminishers, and they suck the life out like vampires. We could probably all think of a few like that. Yes. So yeah. I would just love to get your quick response for people who are not necessarily familiar with your work yet. What are the hallmarks? How do we know if we're in the presence of a multiplier, and how is that different? How is what they do different than somebody who's a diminisher?
Oh boy. Okay. In 20 seconds. That's so multipliers are leaders around whom we do our best work. And probably the simplest way to explain it is they're leaders that we are full around. Like, we are fully intelligent, we are fully contributing, we are playing big, we are doing our best thinking and our best work around these leaders. And, they lead in a way, like, I can sum up the book really in 2 words. They create an environment of safety and an environment of stretch. Whereas diminishers, I think we know what it feels like to work for a diminisher. I have not found someone who hasn't worked for one of these diminishers. And they're people who are often very smart, but no one gets to be fully smart around them. We're kind of a fraction of ourselves. We tend to hold back. We play it safe. And sometimes it's because they're like, I wish I had your like body language on this story. You're like, what is it you do? I love this. I love it. That they're these really tyrannical, narcissistic, like bully kind of leaders that actively shut people down. Others are what I call accidental diminishers. They don't realize they're shutting people down. And sometimes they're just so kind of like stuck in their own head, feeling maybe the burden to have answers to solve the problems, that they don't turn to their team. Or leaders who in some ways are just too nice. And I'm not advocating for like mean leaders, but they see people struggling and they rescue them. So they build strength, and other people get weakened around these kind of leaders, or they're leaders who, are so full of ideas, and they're trying to like spark ideas and energy that other people don't have to. And so people end up kind of languishing around these leaders.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Liz. And your book Multipliers really is helpful in sort of sussing that out and helping people understand how they can do better. Now, if people want to learn more about Liz's book, Impact Players, you can go to impactplayersbook.com. And something that I'm also curious about, when we first met, Liz, I remember very vividly, we were in New York City, you were coming to town, and I interviewed you because you had a new book at the time, Rookie Smarts. And I think you raised some really interesting points. Obviously, in terms of the cultural conversation, what so often gets talked about or assumed is, oh, well, the person with the most experience, they have to be the best. They know how it's done. But in Rookie Smarts, you actually allege that no, not always. We need to learn to tap into a new way of thinking and acting like a rookie in some ways. Can you talk a little bit about that mindset and why that's helpful?
Well, when the world is changing fast, experience can become a burden. when the world is moving fast, sometimes experience can help us because experience is about pattern recognition. Oh, I've seen this problem before. I know exactly what to do. Got it. But when the world is not just moving fast, but changing fast, pivoting, just doing what we've been doing can get us into a lot of trouble. And the book explores kind of the question, which is, is it possible that we're actually at our best when we are not completely naive, ignorant, unqualified, but when we're underqualified for work, when we're new to something, when we're an intelligent contributor, but we're in this space of learning? Because when we're new to something, it tends to prompt all of the kinds of behaviors that so many companies are trying to build in their workforce, like curiosity, humility, empathy, question asking, consulting experts, collaborating, moving quickly, seeking feedback, taking feedback. Like all of those kinds of agile behaviors are natural for us. We don't have to work at it. And so, you can either work hard to stay kind of in this rookie zone mentally, or you can do what I do, which is take the lazy way. Like, if I'm given two choices between the hard way and the lazy way, I always take the lazy way. And the lazy way would be to just keep putting yourself in situations where you are underqualified. And I call it, it's just like stay a rookie. And it forces all the right things. And for me, I call it, Dorie, the naive yes, which is not to say yes to everything. Certainly, it's not this abundant yes. It's a naive yes, which is when someone invites you to do something that you don't know how to do, say yes before your brain kicks in and tells you, you don't know how to do that. Like, it avoids imposter syndrome for certain. You're just like, sure, I'd love to do that. I'd love to write an article on a topic I know nothing about and have it turned in tomorrow. Like, I've done that before. I'm like, I can figure this out overnight.
Yes, you can. I love that, Liz Wiseman. That's a great tip. Don't overthink it. Don't let ourselves overthink it. Instead, we need to be focusing on just moving forward and plunging ourselves into situations where we're forced to grow. I want to take a moment to say hello to some of the great folks who are tuning in and joining us. Thanks for being here. We have Eugenia here from Costa Rica. We have Joy from Calgary. Cheryl's here from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Anthony's tuning in. Stacy's here from Indianapolis, Tanya from Sacramento, Robin from Florida, Noemi is here, Cindy from Savannah. This is fantastic. Chaminda is joining us. Sonia's from Philadelphia. We have Francis from Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico. Amazing. Amy in Denver, Mariana from Finland, and more. We are so glad you are here. And please feel free to type your questions into the chat box for Liz Wiseman. Liz is the author of the new book, Impact Players. If you want to learn more about the book and about her work, you can go to impactplayersbook.com. So, Liz, let's actually dive into the material about your new book, Impact Players. So I wanted to start with one of the metaphors that you actually talk about, one of the stories in Impact Players. When I got a copy of your book, and thank you for it, you sent along a gift, and your gift was actually some honey. And I know that this is crucial to a piece, to a kind of opening story in Impact Players. Maybe you can talk a little bit about why honey? What does this mean? And what does this have to do with being an impact player?
Being an impact player. Slid that in. It's not a story that came out of the research. It's this observation when I looked across all this body of data. So I interviewed 170 managers and asked them to describe someone who was an impact player, a standout contributor who was bringing value, doing work that was really having an impact on the team, the business, the organization, versus someone who was a rock solid contributor. And I'm trying to understand the differences. And when I looked at all of that and kind of built this framework of the differences in how they think and how they act, one of the meta differences across these was how they handle ambiguity and uncertainty and chaos and things that are out of their control. And as I was thinking about this, it became clear that, the contributor is operating through kind of a threat lens, which is something is dangerous, something seems foreign and unusual. I need to get away from it. I need to stay as far away from it as possible. Or I need to let the higher ups deal with that. Whereas the impact player is moving toward it, and through it. And, in some ways, kind of like the way a surfer, when there's this, Dorie, I'm curious what you do when, like, you're at the beach and there's a massive oncoming wave. What do you do? I'll tell you what I do. I tend to like run away. I'm like, okay, get back to shore. And inevitably I get tossed. Are you one of the smart people who,
I dive under it. Is that what you should do?
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I grew up. My family had a beach house, and I got thwacked a lot. So I learned, like, okay, I need to avoid this, and under is usually the best way.
Yeah. And you go through it. So that experience, ocean swimmers and surfers, they dive into the wave and they go through that wave to the other side. And it was just, I was thinking about how the impact players move toward it, whereas the others move away from it. And the image I got in my head was a bee. And it's like, what do you do when you see a bee? Now, if anyone is tuning in who is deathly allergic to bees, like, just turn your volume down right now,
Liz is not a doctor. This is not medical advice.
And there are no live bees here, but like, what do we do when we see a bee? And, by metaphor, when, the like typical contributors see the bee, they fear a swarm. Like, this is a danger, this is a threat, and they turn and they run. Whereas the impact players would see that same bee and go, there might be more bees. And I wonder if we could get more bees, because I see an opportunity to make honey and I'm going to go build a hive. And for me, it became in some ways this central metaphor. Do you go and build honey? As one of the, and part of it came from one of the managers I remember was describing the difference between two people on their team. And they said, in a storm, one of them would go and seek shelter and the other would build a windmill. And, they would find a way to create energy from it.
I love that. It's so great, and such an apt metaphor. So I appreciate you sharing that here. And a question has come in from our friend Anna in New Hampshire, and she wants to know: do you have advice for immigrants that are moving to unfamiliar territories and they might face accidental social diminishers? It occurred to me also that Anna's question kind of touches on rookie smarts, that actually, if you're an immigrant moving to an unfamiliar situation, you might unexpectedly have some advantages in terms of new perspectives. But if you can comment on either or both of those, Liz, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think both of those are the case. That I often think of when I'm trying to kind of get my rookie on, so to speak. I think about the first times I visited certain countries. Like, India is usually the one that's my go-to example of the way I was the first time I went to India, which is like big eyes, paying attention to everything. Why is that happening? Why is this happening? What does that mean? Is that like a power thing? Is that not? Am I being insulted? Am not? Am I saying something inappropriate? I'm hyper aware and hyper present. Whereas now, when I've gone to India, I've been there a number of times, kind of like in, out, I got this. And so I think when we're new to something and new to a culture, it gives us an advantage of hyper awareness. Now, can cultural differences cause accidental diminishing? Absolutely. Because, the way that one might be a really multiplying leader in one culture is going to be a little bit different. Maybe in America, you might very assertively ask questions. So, Dorie, what do you think about this? And what's your opinion? I'd love to know, your opinion on this. Do you have evidence to support that? Whereas if I did that very same thing in Japan, I would probably shut someone down, not light somebody up.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Liz. And it actually ties in with a question that's come in from Gabriel, who is curious. Now, of course, there's cross-cultural differences, but perhaps you can talk a little bit, Liz, about the general characteristics about a leader. We have been talking about multipliers and the importance of being a multiplying leader, somebody who causes others to feel safe, who's able to create an environment in which other people are working at their best. But what would you say that looks like? If somebody were kind of doing an inventory of themselves, like, oh my gosh, am I actually a good leader? What are the key things that they should be looking for that might be telltale signs of having that kind of multiplier mentality?
Well, I'll give you kind of the hard way and the easy way on this as well. Um, and I won't say it's really hard, but the diligent way. There's 5 things I found that multiplying leaders do differently than the diminishing leaders. The first is how they manage talent, and you know, rather than sort of putting people in boxes on an organization, what they do is they look for what people are natively good at. So great leaders find people's native strengths and they put them to use. And, I've been managing long enough that I figured out it's a lot easier and wiser to build jobs around people's strengths than it is to try to get people to be strong at things they're not. Um, Number 2, it's the kind of work environment they create. The diminishing leader creates stress where, the multiplying leader is creating space for people to speak up, space to take risks, space to learn, space to speak truth to power. So they're creating space for people to do their best thinking. The third is how we set direction. And, the diminisher tends to set direction based on what they know. They give directives. Whereas the multiplier leader, they ask questions that get other people stretching, thinking. They kind of offer challenges rather than goals. The fourth is how they make decisions. And, diminishing leaders tend to be decision makers, whereas I think the best leaders, they're sometimes fast decision makers on the small decisions, but on the big decisions, they tend to be debate makers. Like their job is, hey, here's an issue that we need to make an important decision on. Let me frame this issue. Let me pose the question. Let me present our options. Let me get the right people in the room, ask them to bring data, ask them to bring a point of view, and then let's kind of have a hard-hitting debate. And it ends up really unifying a team rather than tearing down a team. I think debate is an incredible tool for team unification. And then the last is kind of how we get things done. And, the diminisher tends to be a micromanager, and the multiplier is what I call an investor because they give other people ownership. Dorie, you and I might be collaborating, but I would say, Dorie, you really get 51% of the vote on this. This is yours. I'm here to support you, but you own this thing. And when we give people ownership, what we're giving people is control and power. And this is an antidote to burnout.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Liz, for raising those great points. We just want to greet some of the terrific folks who are tuning in and joining us for our weekly episode of Better. We have DT in from Rochester. We have Jaime from San Francisco. Linda's here from New York. Holly from the Hudson Valley. Umberto is tuning in from Brazil. Srikant is here from India. We have Miriam from San Jose, Allmorad from Iran. This is fantastic. We have Srinivas from India. Thurania is here from Egypt. So we're so glad to welcome all of you here. Farha, also from India. We're here with Liz Wiseman. She's the author of the book Impact Players. And please ask your questions into the chat box. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. Questions about leadership, about how to be a more effective leader, and how to have more impact in your work. If you'd like to learn more about Liz and her great book, go to impactplayersbook.com. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly episodes of Better, you can actually just go ahead to go to my website, dorieclark.com, sign up to get one of your free self-assessments, and you'll receive reminders about our conversations. So lots of good things there. Now, Liz, something that I am curious about is you mention in your book, Impact Players, that one of the characteristics of someone who is an impact player is, as you say, rather than doing their job, they focus on doing what's needed. I thought that was a really interesting frame, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
When I was looking at the differences between ordinary contributors, and again, it's rock solid contributors, not poor performers or people who are struggling, and impact players, is that managers said that the ordinary contributors, they did their job, they did it well, they were good at their job. I could count on them to do a good job. But what the impact players did is when problems were messy and, it's not really this department's job or that or his job or her job, they go out into that messy space and they do the job that needs to be done. The one that is going unattended, but it's important. And you can imagine how their managers and leaders and clients and stakeholders feel about them because they're willing to go out kind of in no man's land rather than stay in their lane. For me, I learned this one early in my career when, I was interviewing for a job and I had like a clear job I wanted to do. And the VP was like, well, that's great, but that's not your boss has a different problem. And like, what would be great is if you could help her solve the problem she has rather than do this thing you want to do. And I was like, wow, but I'm passionate about this. Like, I really am fired up about this. It's like, I wanted to build a management training program and they needed a technical boot camp. I'm like, well, I don't have a lot of technical skills, and it wasn't the job I wanted, but it was the job that was needed. And he pointed it out to me so clearly that I realized, yeah, my job is to make myself useful. And once I did that, people are like, wow, thank you. We needed that. And could you do this other thing we needed? And now can you take this bigger job and bigger job? And, I think it's not just how we serve the teams we're on. It's we end up doing work that's highly visible and highly valuable when we say my job is to do the job that needs to be done, not the one in my job description.
Yeah, I love that, Liz. And I think it's really important. It's sort of a reminder that it's not all about us and what we want to do, but ultimately it's about solving the needs of the people around us. Let me just ask a quick follow-up. So how did you think about it, or how did you navigate it with regard to that training program, the management training program that you were fired up about? Did you, sort of figure out a way to get to it later on? Or how do you actually sort of balance this perhaps perennial problem that people have about, okay, I understand intellectually, Liz, I should do the thing that's needed. It's going to be high visibility, but there's still this thing that I'm passionate about and I really want to do. How does passion fit into all this?
Yeah. And, it's not like I stopped being passionate about it or I forgot about it. I just put that on pause. And by doing the job that needed to be done, I was building influence. And okay, I'm going to say the word, I was building power. And so two things happened is that as you build influence and power in an organization and get bigger jobs, and I was working with the senior leaders of the company, and this was at Oracle. I was young and I got thrown into a very senior level job. I started to build the kind of influence that was needed to set the agenda. So it's like when you work on the agenda of the organization, you earn the influence and credibility and power needed to help set that agenda. And so later, when the time was right, it was just like a year hence, maybe, that I'm like, you know what? I really think we need to address management training in the company. They're like, you're right. And I had the credibility to do it. And I had so much more power to do it in a way more impactful way than if I had tried to force this thing, like pushing this boulder uphill.
Sounds like you were playing the long game, Liz.
I was playing the long game. And that was one of the things that I was so fascinated when I read your book. I'm like, yeah, it is about just like not just doing what's immediately in front of you and what feels good at the time.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I confess something to you? I'm 57 years old. That's not my confession. Probably obvious.
You were obviously looking amazing. You were the best, Liz Wiseman.
But it took me about 56 years of life to figure this out, that, as I've grappled with what are the right decisions, like at work and as a parent and in so many situations, I finally, about a year ago, stepped back and thought, if I think about like what will be the right thing to have done 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I always make the right decision. Yeah, when we play the long game, we end up making great decisions in the short run.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Thank you for that. And some great questions have been coming in from our viewers. DT was curious, Is being an impact player, do you have to think about it or do it differently if you are in a minority position, if you are a female as compared to a male, or if you are a person of color as compared to a white person, or does it not necessarily matter that much, Liz?
I think there are some really important differences. We found, so the framework was based on interviews with studying 170 different impact players. And when we did our demographics on this, we were so delighted that that pool, which we didn't curate that pool, that was curated by managers voluntarily, and randomly picking people, it was evenly split in gender. It was well distributed on race. It was well distributed on age. And so we find impact players, across like the spectrum. But that doesn't mean that, maybe coming from an underrepresented population doesn't make it harder. It does make it harder. It's so easy to end up not being heard, to sort of being appreciated, but in the background. And it is an issue I address in the book. I call it the missing impact player, that I think there's a lot of people who are thinking about it in these ways, doing the right things, but their contributions are not being seen and valued to the same extent as those well-represented or overrepresented populations. So yeah, and I think this is primarily the manager's job to be able to see value coming from different people and from different populations.
Yeah, thank you. That's really powerful. And we've been tuning in with Liz Wiseman. She's the author of Impact Players. And if you'd like to learn more about her book or buy her book, which is fantastic, go to impactplayersbook.com. And of course, you can learn more about our weekly Newsweek interviews for the show Better. Just follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter at dorieclark.com/LI for LinkedIn. And Liz, we have some really good questions coming in. When it comes to leadership, I love this one. Allmorad, our friend from Iran, he wants to know, which one would you prefer? Would it be better to be a leader of a weak team or just an ordinary member of an ingenious team? What is your answer to this philosophical quandary?
Oh, that's a good one. I've never heard that one before, so that's fun. I'm going to go with, I would rather, in my company, I'd rather have a strong leader of a weak team than an ordinary. Oh, this is a different question. Would you rather be a leader? Oh, no, I'd rather be an ordinary member of an ingenious team.
All right. And why?
Why? I love being around smart people. And it's actually how I ended up doing what I do. I was really lucky. I joined Oracle when they were very young, and they kind of had this hiring strategy of hire for like raw intelligence and achievement and nice. And, honestly, sometimes they compromised on the nice, but rarely on the smart. And I ended up in this organization. I was like, everywhere around me is someone I think is brilliant and a genius. And it was an amazing way to start a career. And I love working around really, really smart people. And I'm happy to be the dumbest person in the room if I get to work with people who are sort of ingenious. So yeah.
All right. I love it. Yeah, it's an interesting thought problem for sure. And we're beginning to wind down. We might have time for just one or two more questions, but Luis from Switzerland chimed in, and he wants to know a little bit more about your perspective, Liz, about how leaders help you navigate ambiguity. This is something that obviously we are all facing these days with the pandemic, with trying to figure out, long-term planning in a moment when things are still so chaotic. We have new variants all the time. We're trying to do long-term planning, but we get a lot thrown at us. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between being a good leader and helping your team navigate ambiguity? And do you happen to have any personal examples? If you do, please feel free to share them.
Well, I do. There's one that comes to mind, and this is Dr. C.K. Prahalad, who is a professor at Michigan. And this was a time where I sort of accidentally found myself in charge of the strategic planning process at Oracle. We're a $25 billion company, and we're global, it's complex, and we're finding it challenging to put together our strategy when the industry's in an inflection point. And CK came in to work with me and the president as we were doing this, and he taught me to really divide everything into sort of these two categories: things you know and things you don't know, and to document what you don't know, and to build a strategy of like, here are the things that we do know. So like, okay, we're not completely lost, but we don't know everything. And rather than pretend we, have answers to things we don't know, we're going to document that. And it's going to be part of our strategy process is we know this, but we don't know this. And I actually think it's something that leaders can do to help people navigate ambiguity. The tendency is to want to pretend we know things like, oh yeah, we're going to be back to work in the fall and don't worry, this is going to happen. And we make stuff up and we erode trust on our team and create fear. Or we say, I don't know anything. We stop sending out emails. We stop communicating. Like, I can't count on anything. So my answer is, I don't know. Neither of those are helpful. And I think the best leaders say, you know what, we're in a situation of ambiguity. There's a lot of things like we're navigating in the dark here. Now, there's some things that we know and things that we see. They're this. We can kind of count on that and we can move forward with that. But there's a number of things we don't know. And this is what we have to find answers to as we move forward together.
That's so great. Liz, I'm going to ask you one more last thought question here. This is from Mariana in Finland. And Mariana is curious, and I think probably a lot of people are sharing this thought. We'd love to get your best, sort of low-hanging fruit tip, if there is such a thing, if you want to start raising awareness within your organization about how to improve leadership overall and creating more open discussions and feedback. If you want to, let's say you're someone who's not the highest up in the organization, but you really believe in creating a culture of better leadership. What is it that you can do to start, throwing the stone into the pond to create the ripple? Give us your best strategy, if you don't mind.
Well, I have seen one work really well over the years. So I wrote this book about multiplying leaders and diminishing leaders. And, a lot of people want to go into their organization and call out the diminishers. We're going to rid the organization of diminishers. We're going to talk about all the diminishers. That doesn't go so well. But when we look at the ways that we end up diminishing with the best of intentions, the ways that we become accidental diminishers, this is a conversation I find not just most people want to talk about, kind of everyone wants to talk about it. So to look at, here's what I'm doing with the best intent that's shutting down ideas, energy, innovation, ownership, all the things that we want, and to get that conversation going. And again, this is one of those lazy ways it just works. Like, you can work hard to be this multiplier leader, or you can do what I do, which is just tell everyone who you work with what your accidental diminisher tendencies are. Like, oh, I'm a total optimist and I'm always looking at the upside, because then I go into my optimist mode and people don't have to go, should we tell her that that's annoying? Should we tell her that she's under, perceiving all of the struggle and challenge that we're dealing with? They just go, Liz, you're in idea fountain mode again, or you're in optimist mode. And I can correct like this.
That sounds like a fantastic strategy. And thank you for sharing your insights with us. We have been here with Liz Wiseman. She's the author of the new book, Impact Players. Tune in to impactplayersbook.com to learn more about it. And thank you to everyone for tuning in this week. Liz and everyone, we will see you later, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks everyone for joining. And Dorie, thank you for the conversation.